Dolmenwood is written by Gavin Norman, the mastermind behind Necrotic Gnome and Old School Essentials, which is a much beloved, cleaned up version of Dungeons & Dragons BX sets from 1981. Dolmenwood is its own rule set, more or less, and is published by Necrotic Gnome and distributed by Exalted Funeral. This game comes as 3 books and some other fun stuff. In this video, I first want to show you all the physical products that I received from the Kickstarter for this game, then take you through a brief overview of what this game is about, then walk through the highlights of the player's handbook, the monster book, and the campaign book, and finally give you my honest thoughts on this game just based on my read through. First, what is this game about? The elevator pitch for Dolmenwood might be that it's a BX D&D hack, but fungal and fairy tale-ish. It's built on the chassis of what Gavin Norman has made a successful writing and publishing career out of, which is Old School Essentials, aka BX all cleaned up and streamlined. If you know what an armor class is, if you know what a saving throw is, and if you trade 1 gold for 1 XP at the end of each adventure, then you pretty much already know how to play this game. However, and this is the crucial part, it is not just a setting book for OSE. You do not need the OSE rules tome or the D&D rules cyclopedia to run this. These 3 books are the complete game. The setting itself is a mystical, ancient, foresty realm located in a fantasy version of the British Isles. It is a place where the barrier between the mortal world and the fairy realm, fairy with a capital F, is perilously thin. The themes here are folk fantasy rather than high fantasy. You're going to find regular people and some very irregular people trying to survive in a wood where the fungus is sentient, the standing stones are watching you, and the local priest is fighting a losing theological war against goat men overlords. It creates a very specific vibe. It's earthy, it's damp, it feels lived in, and mechanically it shifts the focus from dungeon delving to hexcrawling. The slipcase for Dolmenwood is a black leatherette with foil. You get a goat on either side and the name of the game on the spine. We're going to be discussing goats a lot in this video, by the way, so buckle up for that. The case contains 3 books. Let's start with the player's book. This is a hefty feeling tome, although it's only 200 pages. The foil effects on the cover are debossed or slightly sunken in. It feels quite nice. Even the back has the debossed treatment. The front end papers have a map of Dolmenwood. The pages are thick and semi-glossy. I'm actually going to cover the contents of this book in more detail using the digital version, but here I just want to show you that this physical book is really sturdy and deluxe looking. You get a brown bookmark here, brown because this is sort of a brown setting. Stitched binding is always nice, and the back end papers have a lot of quick reference rules. The next book is the Monster Book. This one runs about 137 pages. Front end pages have some very handy cross-references of all the monsters in the book. This is actually a really remarkable bestiary in terms of how efficiently it presents each creature, as well as the art and the originality of a lot of them. The back end papers have another way of cross-referencing all of the creatures, both by type and level. It's an extremely usable and user-friendly monster manual. The third and final book in the slipcase is a monster in and of itself. This campaign book is 400 pages and contains a bunch of settlement info, faction descriptions, GM techniques, and advice on how to run Dolmenwood well, and hundreds of pages of 1-page hex location descriptions. There are 2 bookmarks for this one. Really, this is just an overwhelming amount of playable content, but you're not going to see a single text wall in the whole thing. It's all visually appealing and easy to read. Well, 400 pages is not easy to read exactly, but this isn't one of those books you read cover to cover anyway. The next book that I got, which is not a part of the slipcase, is a handy maps book and contains pretty much all of the many dozens of area and settlement maps made for the game, many of which do not have numbered locations so that you can show them to players. This one runs 73 pages and is almost entirely artwork, but artwork that you can actually put to work at the table. Not everyone is a fan of these muted colors and the medieval manuscript approach to depicting settlements, but I personally can't get enough of these illustrations. I find them mesmerizing. Hats off to the artist who did these, Arlene Ortiz, I think it was. What a triumph. Next out of the box were a handful of adventures, some of which I've seen before published for Old School Essentials, like the classic Winter's Daughter. One of the most interesting features about these adventures is that they're each barely 30 pages long, but they all have these hardcore ultra deluxe color hardcovers and stitched binding. They're easily the most overbuilt zines I've ever held in my life. I think this is a result of Gavin Norman and his team recognizing that fans of OSE and his other work are largely bibliophiles who buy his stuff expecting the absolute best physical quality books. And I'm one of those people. But honestly, these zines as deluxe hardcovers do feel a bit overly luxurious. I'd love to run each of these adventures and tell you about the actual content, but I don't really want to leaf through them here and spoil them without any meaningful analysis. Next is probably the single nicest RPG map I have ever seen or felt. I can't quite describe it to you on video here, but basically the synthetic material used for this map feels remarkably like a very fine, very expensive lambskin. It's so smooth and soft, but not ultra smooth on the back. The backside has a very nuanced roughness to it that you get with fine suede. It's just a tad perverse that this map feels so much like the skin of a young goat because goatfolk are a major part of the setting. But that's really on brand for Dolmenwood, which aims to recreate a really dark fairy tale. I remember ordering the dice bag, but not springing for the Dolmenwood dice, I think because the dice looked like the numbers would be hard to read. But the dice bag is nice. It's a dark brown canvas with embroidered mushrooms on the side. Obviously, this bag can be used for any game. If you dig that mushroom motif, you can rock this bag as your daily carry. I also picked up a pin. I really liked the design on this, and I didn't know which noble house of Dolmenwood it belonged to. Apparently, this one is for House Malbleet, a house of chaotic goatfolk. They're the kind of house you might rise up against if you're running a light side sort of campaign. And lastly, there's a Dolmenwood patch. It's a patch. It says Dolmenwood. Slap it on your black denim vest or whatever. Let's get into the so-called player's book. It follows the standard BX structure, ability scores, characters, magic, equipment, but many of the nouns are all different. I'm not sure if that difference matters beyond flavor, but you do come away with a sense of a distinct setting as a result. Let's jump into the stuff that is largely the same as it ever was. You roll 3d6 to get an ability score for 6 different core abilities, and those scores translate to a modifier of -3 to +3. Those 6 abilities are strength, intelligence, wisdom, all that. But right away you can see Gavin Norman's sort of incredible ability to lay things out in a helpful way. Under each of those dusty old core abilities, we actually get a definitive list of things that those abilities are used for, and page numbers referring to where those things are explained in further detail. This sort of organization might seem boring or obvious, but I'm telling you, this is not common in RPG books, especially ones that are riffing off of old Dungeons & Dragons rules. Actually, here are all the languages in the setting. I don't really want to get into the details of the languages themselves, but rather point out the fact that they all fit on a 2-page spread. Again, this is an exceptionally player and GM-friendly layout practice that makes it easy to read and later reference for information. I think with all things considered here, one of the single most important aspects of this game, standing out as its own setting and game in general, is the different kindreds. In this fungal folkloric Britain, the goatfolk, known as Breggles, rule over the general region alongside humans, dividing themselves into working class shorthorns and noble longhorns. I think the most interesting thing about this conceit is, of course, the fact that goatfolk are in charge of any human domains at all. I've never seen this done in a setting, at least not without imminent war between species following. If you unpack this a little, it means that in these medieval towns and villages, goat lords are strutting around and bossing humans around and exploiting their labor and all that good stuff. And this is the status quo. It's actually kind of creepy. Elves in Dolmenwood are actually pretty bog standard. They're immortal, they're fey, they have innate magic, unearthly beauty. No surprises or innovations here as far as I could tell. Grimalkin, on the other hand, are a bit outside of the beaten path, although you're seeing them more and more nowadays due to the prevalence of anime and furry culture. They're catfolk. Well, actually, they're a bit more complicated than that here. They're shapeshifters who can take on the form of an upright humanoid cat, a normal cat on all fours, and a sort of spectral, ghostly form where all you can see are the eyes. So, magical catfolk. I'm always a little wary of catfolk of any sort in my game because they're an obvious platform for jokes. They can end up being an invitation to constantly joke around and try to be funny with every line spoken and every action taken. This isn't the fault of the catfolk concept itself, but rather what a lot of players assume is the expectation of a walking, talking cat character. What's ironic is that if you try to tone down the jokes as a player running a catfolk character, you'll probably end up with funnier moments. I think the best moments are going to happen when you're trying to be a serious talking cat. Also, that spectral form with the floating eyes is clearly an homage to the Cheshire cat from Alice in Wonderland. There are no surprises with humans. They're mortal, live in towns and villages, and sometimes interbreed with Breggles and with elves. There is no mechanical discussion of mixed heritage characters in the book, though. I guess you just pick one kindred or another for the abilities, I'm not sure. Mosslings are the sort of poster child for Dolmenwood, in my opinion. They're described as gnarled, woody humanoids whose fertile flesh hosts mosses, molds, and fungi. That's pretty much Dolmenwood itself, or at least what it's aspiring to be. Mosslings are native to the region and live in dark, dank forests, in burrows under the ground, and you'll find them in human settlements, selling mushrooms, ale, and cheese at the markets. It's notable that they are not fae or fairy in nature, but rather mortals who live several hundred years. When they die, naturally, their bodies make for remarkably good compost. Woodgrue are little batfolk, described as demi-fae goblins known for their love of music, revelry, and arson. I like bats. Bats are cool, but one thing you have to remember about them is that sometimes they have really ugly looking faces. The Dolmenwood team really leaned in on some of the uglier potential bat species when doing the art, and I thought that was kind of unfortunate. But aesthetics aside, woodgrues are essentially just mischievous little goblins. They actually have some inherent magical songs that can create a huge ruckus, as well as other songs that enchant people into doing things like spill secrets or laugh uncontrollably. There are 9 playable classes in the game, and of course, these will each materially alter your play experience because they're where most of your adventurer's abilities stem from. The Bard, for example, gives you the ability to decipher any non-magical text that is in a language you don't know, perform sleights of hand, identify monsters. What strikes me about these classes is not so much the inventiveness of the abilities, but their presentation and breadth. In terms of presentation, check out how Gavin Norman once again flexes his superpower of presenting all relevant information for a given topic on 2 pages. He did this to good effect in Old School Essentials, and he does it here again. If you're playing or running this game, it's a godsend to be able to turn to a page and have a single huge panel of information like this without needing to flip the page, digitally or physically. The second thing is the breadth of options. Every class has a good spread of different play options. The Enchanter, as a random example here, is normally only played through a fairy or a demi-fae, such as the elves, Grimalkins, and woodgrues, but if you choose that route, you get the use of fairy runes, a whole system of magical sigils that basically cast all kinds of spells organized by their strength. Thankfully, the strength is broken down into lesser, greater, and mighty rather than numbered levels. Enchanters also get so-called glamours, which are innate magical talents that some kindred inherit. This is just another collection of spells, and they all have some kind of utility or application to adventuring, which I appreciated. I think the more modern approach to spells in a D&D-like RPG like this is to do away with the dump spells and useless cantrips and just have a curated, titrated, short list of extremely useful magical effects. To be fair here, Gavin's list of glamours does spill over to a 3rd page. I'm sure he lost a lot of sleep over that decision. Interestingly, if you play as a magician, a term which I have had debates about in the past, but which I love for a fantasy setting, you're a wielder of arcane magic. This is essentially wizard magic, and it's learned from study and contained in spell books. A magician never wants to lose their spell book, of course, because that means spending a week and a whopping 1,000 gold per rank of spell to transcribe all their known spells into a new book. But if they manage to keep hold of their book, they have access to this bevy of up to 60 different spells. I appreciate the absolutely rigid organization of these spells. They're numbered by rank, but also within each rank, and there are exactly 12 per rank. This is a personal thing, I guess, but I just really like the tidiness of the spell list. As far as the actual arcane spells here, you're not going to find any surprises, I think. Actually, let me know in the comments if you've run into anything funny or broken or interesting with the spells in this game. I can't seem to find anything that is particularly out of balance or outlandishly unthematic or anything. These all seem like great wizard spells presented in succinct, easy to read and reference text. I might as well mention the fact that there's yet another class of magic called holy magic, bestowed upon the devout adherents of the setting's Plurintine Church. That would be the friar class, of course. Well, look right here. It says in the tenets of the church that all life is sacred. If we go back and look at the holy spells, yeah, they are largely support spells and non-offensive in nature. It's only when you get to rank 5 that you get a few attacks, and then right at the end there, you can straight up turn into a necromancer. I was surprised to see a full spread addressing pipe leaf, which in the lands of Dolmenwood are a much loved and much varied preoccupation. Obviously inspired by the stuff that is smoked in Tolkien's Middle-earth, you get a whopping 20 different kinds of pipe leaf, all of which invokes one kind of effect or another. This game does not shy away from the fact that this stuff is a narcotic that does fun stuff. There's also a special rule that if you smoke this stuff for hours undisturbed, you get a clue from the GM about some problem. Which, if there are any kids watching this, that is not how weed works in the real world. Don't do drugs. But speaking of drugs, of course, a dark fungal D&D is going to have magic mushrooms and other herbs that do magical things. And I mean literally magical. As long as you're not squeamish about drug use in your game, I think all this pipe leaf and other substances really add a lot of atmosphere and theme to a play experience. There are some somewhat significant little changes to the baseline rules, most notably when rolling a skill check. Instead of rolling a d20 for those, you're rolling a d6 and adding your core attribute modifier, which, if you recall, ranges from -3 to +3 for any given attribute. On this d6 roll, if your modified roll is 4 or higher, it's a success. A natural 1 always fails and a natural 6 always succeeds. You also use these d6 rolls for ability checks. You use a d20 for saving throws and attack rolls. If you've never played BX or Old School Essentials before, you might find that there is a lot of rules minutia in this game. Rules for everything related to being out in the wilderness, including minute details for hunger penalties, travel rules, which to be fair are nicely fitted on a 2-page spread, but still, just because it's a 2-pager doesn't mean it isn't a lot of fiddly rules to remember when traveling. Camping and sleeping in the wilderness is a whole bunch of procedure if you're not used to it. And there are separate movement and resting rules if you're in a dungeon, actually. But if you do have familiarity with old school D&D, especially that particular flavor from 1981, then all this will be second nature to you, and you can focus on what is the actual point of this game, which is not the rules. It's this stuff right here, the setting. The deeply considered, possibly overwritten, but lovingly overwritten backdrop on which your story is supposed to take place. There's a very distinct calendar with unique months and moon signs that change the nature of your character depending on which one they were born under, usually giving you bonuses to rolls, and dozens more pages of noble houses, spreads on religion, not to mention an entire 137-page book of monsters. Let's actually take a look at that monster book because it's one of the pillars of the game and a remarkable sort of accomplishment all its own. The book is actually called Monster Book instead of Bestiary, which is great because most people can't pronounce bestiary right, including myself for a number of years. There are two things I want to show you about this book without actually revealing too much of the content. The first is the table of contents. You get 90 monsters. Oh, check it out. There's the word bestiary, actually. Anyway, you also get another 20 or so pages for NPCs and animals. Some of these so-called animals are really monsters, in my opinion. Actually, the terminology is pretty confusing because in old school D&D, all creatures that you might fight, including other humans, were referred to as monsters. But here we have a bestiary of beasts that includes a bunch of humanoids, as well as a list of monsters called animals, some of which really are just animals. Whatever. The second thing I wanted to show you was this masterclass in presenting a monster or beast or whatever. Big name at the top, no more than 2 lines of description underneath. The core stats are 3 lines, easy to read. Secondary information, that is 4 to 5 lines. And really my favorite little innovation that you'll find on all of these entries is the traits table. Sometimes 1 and sometimes 2, depending on if the monster has more than one general form. These add a ton of variety to the monsters and opens the game up to what I think any D&D style game should have, which is variety. You do not want to find yourself fighting the same looking monsters over and over. So with these traits tables, you can mix things up pretty nicely. And you don't have to strictly go by these tables either. You can just use them for inspiration on the fly to always keep your players on their toes and a little bit uncertain about what they're facing. Honestly, I think this game is quite playable and viable and really pretty extraordinary before you get to the 473-page campaign book. But then you get to this book and the product becomes something different. Let's just look at the contents for a minute here. 30 pages of general information about the realm, 40 pages on various factions and major NPCs, 20 pages on how to run a campaign and actually design dungeons and environments. Let's pop in here for a second. I've largely moved away from bashing Wizards of the Coast and first-party 5th edition products on this channel, but I just want to formally note that Dolmenwood has more guidance on how to design and even map out a dungeon in 2 pages than WotC's D&D 5e has in all 30 plus of its books combined. And their game is called Dungeons and Dragons. But I digress. There are about 15 pages on exploration, 60 pages of settlements, and just hundreds and hundreds of pages of hex descriptions, all based on a master hex map. Now, all that being said, what do all of these pages look like? How are they presenting all of this information? Well, as you might imagine, every last page of this book is tightly organized and pretty generously illustrated. Note that you'll never get a paragraph of more than 6 or 7 lines long before there's a break with a new subtitle. Tons and tons of information in this book, too much to take in for a GM unless they dedicate months of study to it. But ironically, every page reads like a hot knife through butter. All the information is relentlessly broken up into small readable chunks. As for the actual setting here, Dolmenwood was originally a domain of primeval wood gods, but was conquered and frozen by the fairy Cold Prince until his withdrawal allowed the sorceress Droon and human settlers to populate the land. The Droon rose to power by binding the old gods, while the goat-headed Breggles rebelled and established their own nobility alongside the humans. Settlers from Brackenwold later found a kingdom and introduced the monotheistic Plurotine Church, driving the Droon into the deep woods. However, when the Cold Prince returned to wage war 900 years ago, the king and church were forced to form the Triple Compact, an alliance with the Droon, to successfully banish the Fairy Lord back to his realm. Stability was shattered 400 years ago by the arrival of the Nag Lord, a chaos godling who corrupted the forest's waters and destroyed the Abbey of St. Cloud. In the present year 1089, with the church weakened and the Droon's power waning, the Nag Lord's Crookhorn armies are massing for an all-out war against civilization. It's good stuff. And again, if I didn't mention it before, this is the point of the product. It's to experience this setting. And nowhere does the setting come to life more than in this campaign book. One thing I have to mention though is the fact that you're going to need to be comfortable with goatfolk. Goats get a bad rap though. The Christian vilification of goats as a proxy for paganism was a gradual process that largely solidified during the Middle Ages, though it found its scriptural footing in the Gospel of Matthew's separation of the sheep, the saved, from the goats, the damned. As the church sought to eradicate persistent nature worship in Europe, it increasingly appropriated the iconography of Greek god Pan and other horned fertility deities characterized by goat legs, horns, and beards to visually define Satan. By the 12th century and continuing through the 14th century Knights Templar trials, which popularized the goat-headed Baphomet, the once benign symbol of wilderness and vitality was successfully inverted into the definitive appearance of the devil. effectively branding the old rustic religions as demon worship. Which is all to say, goats are not inherently evil, but if you're still hung up on goats being bad, then you might be a little uncomfortable with the setting because it's heavy on the goatfolk. And actually, the game doesn't even shy away from the old Christian smear campaign on goats. You got the old devil goat right here in the monster book. I don't know though. As the GM, you could probably maybe surgically remove Breggles from your campaign and just run a humanocentric version of the setting. There are plenty of human factions and they can occupy enough of a plot to make that work. The settlements in the book are great. You get a sort of medieval style map for each one and just a ton of usable information, all broken down into bite-sized pieces. Each settlement also has a number of locations, most of which are equipped with at least one interesting social or combat encounter. So you end up with an environment where players can arrive at a setting and choose how and where they want to explore it. And you have a fun little interaction for them at every turn. Each sublocation is mercifully short, so prepping the settlement really just requires reading everything once and then referring to it during the session. The hundreds of hex descriptions are not quite as lavishly detailed though. They are all one page each, but interestingly, the layout varies from hex to hex depending on what it contains. I appreciated the fact that each of these hexes ends up being wildly different from one another visually. The creators didn't just copy paste a template for each of them. It was at this point that I realized that Dolmenwood is a completely realized, fully fleshed world to be explored, and you will pretty much never be able to explore it all. A group could spend months and years crawling this map and they never see the same thing twice. But alright, here are my overall thoughts on Dolmenwood. Cons: know the setting. The setting is original and really fun and all, but there's really pretty much no way you can meaningfully play this game with a bunch of players who show up and just try to vibe their way through the world armed with generic fantasy Forgotten Realms Tolkien movie knowledge. In order to get the most out of this game, everyone needs to do maybe a bit of reading and thinking. They need to unpack the implications of having goat people lording over human peasants and bat-faced munchkins selling pipe leaf at the town market as a normal way of life. The reading is incredibly fun and rewarding here, but count yourself lucky if you have players who like to do homework before playing a game. Procedural density. The shadow of basic expert D&D looms long and dark on this game's approach to combat, exploration, and everything else. It's great if your group has already internalized this style of gameplay, but if they're more a beer and pretzels type of group, a lot of the rules minutia in this game is going to seem like a major drag on gameplay and natural collective storytelling. Pros: the layout. I've said it 100 times in this video and I'll say it again. Gavin Norman is one of the best layout designers working in the RPG space today. The spread-based design, the text always broken up into readable chunks, and the copious illustrations and attractive font choices. Aside from looking good, it just respects you as a GM. It reduces the cognitive load of running the game. Aesthetic and thematic cohesion. Everything fits. Much of the artwork has that medieval illuminated manuscript look with a slightly modern touch. The fungal theme is reinforced by actual fungus folk and a variety of powerful magical mushrooms that you can eat. And the goat folk are appropriately paganistic. It all feels like this old fairy tale England that has wisps of familiarity, but is also entirely unique. Staggering breadth. I don't think this game could have gotten away without the monster book. You definitely need that manual of 200 or so creatures to stock the world with in order to get properly thematic combat encounters. But Dolmenwood could have definitely gotten away without the 473-page campaign book and still been considered a pretty playable game. The fact that there's this encyclopedic tome that defines every last corner of the hex-mapped region, totaling maybe thousands of square miles, is a very thick layer of icing on the cake. Like I mentioned, I think it gives this game a level of replayability that stretches into years. Primo physical products. Gavin Norman's books always tend to be printed by Standart out of Lithuania. I think that's who did the books in this case. I wasn't able to tell, but the quality of the physical books is absolutely at that top tier, like with his OSE books. Even the little 30-page zine-length adventures are printed as premium hardcovers with stitched binding. It's pure luxury. and the physical hex map feels indistinguishable from actual lambskin. I'm still sort of gobsmacked by the tactile sensation of touching and handling that hex map, and I don't think I'll ever get a map like that again. Great soundtrack. I totally didn't mention this before, but Gavin and his team were able to commission a fantasy synth musician who goes by Tales Under the Oak to do a soundtrack for Dolmenwood. I don't want to play any of the songs here because of copyrights, but you can go to YouTube or Spotify or wherever and listen to this soundtrack for free. I was actually a huge fan of Tales Under the Oak way before Dolmenwood announced the partnership, so I was pretty excited about the songs coming out. Then when I heard them, I discovered that the music was some of the best that they had ever produced. They went outside of their comfort zone and created new soundscapes to match the dark, foggy, fungal world that Gavin had created. And I think most importantly, the songs never have any distracting crescendos, so they can be played as background continuously during any Dolmenwood play session. So is Dolmenwood worth the shelf space? If you're looking for a generic fantasy kitchen sink where you can just drop in and play without thinking, or if your group is strictly married to the superhero antics of modern Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, this is probably not for you. It demands that you appreciate the damp, mossy, slightly uncomfortable vibe of a medieval fairy tale. If you are willing to step into that fairy ring, you're in for arguably one of the finest implementations of the BX rule set ever produced. It's a masterclass in information design and of aesthetic cohesion and a physical product that feels heirloom worthy. I think Gavin Norman didn't just write a setting here, he sort of grew one, and it is absolutely worth getting lost in. Thanks for watching. If you've run Dolmenwood, let me know in the comments how your players handled the goat lords, or if they just spent the whole session smoking pipe leaf. Like and subscribe for more RPG reviews, and join the channel as a member for exclusive videos and content. Links for everything are below. I'll see you in the next one.